Cheers. Thanks, Matt. Okay, I'm going to try and be brief because Matt just said 5 to 10 minutes and I think I'd done 10 to 15. So if there's gaps, I do apologise in advance. I just wanted to talk a little bit about how social values manifested itself in our business. And I think mine and Issy's stories are dramatically different because I think we're very different organisations. Bit of context about Places for People and Places Impact is probably helpful. I work for Places Impact, which is a charitable vehicle that sits within the Places for People group. We used to be the neighbourhoods function that sat within affordable housing, but now we have a group remit, and I think that group context is really important. There isn't going to be a test on this, which is probably a relief, but this is the current group structure of Places for People. 27 group companies, probably about 200 JVs, very, very, very different companies in there, some profit making, some non-profit making, and one charitable vehicle, which is the one I work for. And I think that's really important to understand because thematically, there's a lot of diversity in there. We're not a straightforward housing association. That's part of what we do, but it's only a part. And that's some of the sectors that we're currently working in. And in context of scale, we're at about, probably going to touch about 1 billion turnover next year. As part of that, we've repositioned social values, as I said, so it's now gone into a group context and works across the entire group. The challenge that we had was, as this group has grown and diversified and got bigger and stronger, was how do we measure social value? And we've done some great work. We've worked with HACT. We used that tool very successfully within affordable housing context, but that was part of the business. So how do we find a meaningful way, a common language for measuring social value? So the brief that I was given after Matt did a very successful presentation to our chief executive was, okay, there's 27 group companies, can you make it happen, please? That sent us on a very interesting journey, catalysed by Impact, the product that Reason Digital have developed, and it made us go on a journey of understanding how social value manifests itself within those very diverse and different businesses. And what we had to do was find a way to make that difference, and that's the first element, that difference meaningful, and then to look at where the golden threads, those common themes, that common language exists throughout all those different businesses. And that's what we've started to use Impact to do. It's the start of a journey, but it's a really fascinating and interesting one. In terms of golden threads, the fairly obvious ones, CO2 savings. Every business that we have is going to have those. Might actually increase CO2, but at least we have a frame of reference for managing it. We might look at staff fundraising, we might look at volunteering, and they're things that everyone within the business would do. But clearly there is difference there, and that's one of the things that we wanted to try and capture. What underpinned our approach to this was what we would probably call a shared growth model, and a drive towards business development. And I think this is probably different to the way that Manchester use the tool, but it's something that's gained traction out in our business. It measures social value, that's a great thing in and of itself, but it was the business development and some culture change, which I'll come on to, which I think was one of the really powerful things that Impact helped us to do. Going back to that shared growth model, very, very simple. If our communities succeed, we succeed. If we can then record, measure and demonstrate that, that means we can continue to grow our business. And that's what Impact is ultimately going to help us to do. A very example for us, and again this is in a placemaking regeneration context, which is what Places for People ultimately is that if we are looking at developing something in Milton Keynes, a placemaking regeneration project, what we want to be able to demonstrate is the impact that we have on the area, not just in terms of placemaking regeneration, but in terms of supported housing. If we're working with our capital business to start an equity fund, then we can start to bring an environmental, social and governance agenda. If we're working with our leisure business, we can start to demonstrate how that leisure operation in Milton Keynes impacts. If you bring all those things together, you aggregate them, and you have a very, very powerful business development narrative in social value terms. We're using it in some really interesting applications. We deliver Westminster Housing Option Service to support homeless people in Westminster. When we tendered for that work, the social value of itself was really compelling, but what really clinched us getting that work was the fact that we had a tool that could be made to be bespoke for that application, so that we had real-time reporting that ultimately our commissioning authority could access without needing to ask us for what the outcomes that the programme had delivered. And again, that was a really, really compelling business case. The sort of things we're also working now are things around supply chain. We're starting to do pilots with when our supply chain partners deliver social value. We don't need to share spreadsheets; they can just report directly into a tool, and it's real time, which is really, really important. I mentioned it's the start of the journey, but I think what's really interesting is how the way that we are implementing the impact product has mirrored the growth and development and the diversity of our business. It's catalysed things, but it's not technology leading that change. It's tech, but it's not tech, if that makes sense, because although it's a deeply technical product, I'm not technical, and I'm sure Matt would concur with that assessment. But because you've got a product that is intuitive and works across the business, we've been able to develop it and roll it out very, very easily. Automation. Who doesn't like something that can plug into systems, draw information through, and stop us having to write lots and lots of spreadsheets? And again, that's a real-time benefit for us. And that journey around automation has been a fascinating one, because it's drawing in lots of different parts of the business that haven't been previously involved with generating social value, or they didn't think they generated social value. We've got it wrong along the way, but the fact that it's not a static product and we can change it and we can do things differently means that we can constantly adapt and not just get the mistakes changed, but we can grow it with the business as the business grows and changes. There's been an issue around future-proofing, but I think that's not down to the product. That's about us understanding what 5 years down the line looks like in social value and how we would want to record and report. And that changes as our customer base changes. Commissioners want different things to local authorities, for instance. One of the really, really important things for us has been about business and cultural change. I mentioned that impact has sort of catalysed a lot of thinking within the business. It's not just made us recognise where we generate social value, but it's starting to make us think about what we should do in social value terms. It's changed things at an operational and strategic level. Operationally, all our frontline staff can see the tool, can see the change, can see the values and outcomes that are happening on a daily basis. That is a brilliant staff engagement function. And what we're finding, and this is one of the really happy mistakes that we had, that when we set up an activity that we wanted to be automated and we couldn't get it to work, my mistake, we left that activity open. And what we found is that staff started to record things around debt management and supporting customers with financial inclusion activity. We wouldn't have got those really inspiring stories from our frontline staff unless we'd have had that tool in place. But it's working at a strategic level as well, particularly with the ventures businesses. And what we're starting to do is make ventures businesses who are profit making understand how they can generate social value, but really interestingly, they're now writing those into their business plan because they recognise the business development potential of having that offer alongside their core business. And the even better part about that, they're not just putting stuff in that they think should be there, they're putting stuff in that works within the group context and works for their customers. We're only starting this functionality within Impact that we haven't even explored yet. Leaderboards is one. Staff engagement functionality, I'm sure, is much further down the line than we are. And I think our story is one about a macro, whereas probably Issy's story is one about detail. But we're at the start and it's a really good journey. But I think the really important thing that we've taken from all of this is that this is about technology catalysing, improving and provoking conversations rather than a tech that dictates what we need to do. I hope that's been helpful. Thanks.
So yeah, already we've started to sort of hear some really interesting things there about some of the ways that empowering people on the sort of grassroots level of your organisation has been quite surprising in terms of the amount of social value activity that they're doing, and also some interesting things there about how some business as usual work across, ventures and other areas of the business is actually really contributing to social value as well, and maybe not just necessarily the business as usual. It's been really rewarding for us at Impact to go on that journey with Places for People to understand how we can empower you to use technology to better record and manage this stuff. And we've been really surprised about the kind of the depth of the cultural impact that's had in terms of generating more socially valuable activity to happen. I think, really one of the themes that comes across in your talk there, Jamie, is what is not measured can't really be managed, and when you start measuring it, more stuff just naturally starts to happen, more conversations, it becomes clearer. Without further ado then, I'd like to welcome Issy Taylor from One Manchester to talk about social value at One Manchester. Issy, thank you.
So everyone, I'm from One Manchester, and we are a merger of two organisations. We merged 2 years ago, and part of our merger was that we wanted to create more social value and opportunities for our customers. What we want to do is provide quality homes. We want to lead, deliver and inspire social change across our areas. And we want to use our skills and resources to build resilient, thriving communities. One of our pledges to customers when we merged was we would increase social value by 20%. Now that was a really big target, and one of the big issues around that is we didn't know what our social value was to begin with. So I was tasked with giving that job of finding out, well, what actually is our social value? It can't be that hard, is it? Just go around and find out. So by going around and finding out and working out what is social value, who's recording it, some of the usual suspects were recording social value, like our employment and skills teams. This is what our strapline is, and we were thinking, how can we actually make that resonate with all of our business, with our community safety teams, with our neighbourhood officers teams, with our financial inclusion teams? Actually, how do we ensure that they understand how they all contribute to social value? One of the other things we did is look at actually how does tech support all of our businesses. So if we're trying to look at how we create a social value framework and that not be scary to our staff, actually what are all the other tech things that we use automatically on a day-to-day basis that we don't actually think about as tech because we're just busy using the systems. So we have a lot of different things that we use as part of housing associations that we don't always think of as tech or as the system helping us. We actually just use that for our day-to-day work. We also use tech where it actually helps us. So with Warp It, with Space Hive, we use that with our community groups to help them crowdfund to get more money to do their community things that they want to do. We see tech as the enabler, not as a barrier or as the challenge. And the challenges we had around social impact are about what impact are we already having. We weren't really clear, we didn't know what we were doing. How does actually what we do in employment actually affect what we're doing in financial inclusion and vice versa? What is our social impact out in the community and what are the stories that people would say about us? We weren't clear about that either. And actually, how do we report and monitor that when people saw that as an additional drain on resources and time, and actually very laborious? So what we developed was a social investment strategy that pulled all those things together, and we developed a social outcomes framework for the whole business about all of our activities. That includes rents, that includes community safety and our ASBOs and all of that. It includes neighbourhood services, everything. And then we thought, how do we get indicators that tell us if we're doing all right, if we're improving, if we're going backwards, and how can we collate that all in one place so it's visible for all staff? Because I don't know about you guys, but in our organisation, social value was a bit of a up here thing that only 1 or 2 people really knew about, and it was all a bit mystical, and you had to spend 5 hours talking to them to actually understand anything about it. And we wanted to demystify that. And this is when we went out to the market and spoke to a lot of people. The reason we really liked the impact tool is it is so visible. You can see what you're doing as an income officer. You can see what somebody in the neighbourhood team are doing. It's all completely visible. You can see how your team and you are delivering on our overall strategy. Our grounds maintenance now understand how much they give to social value in terms of their day-to-day jobs. And if you'd asked them that 2 years ago, they would have said, oh, that's nothing to do with me. Oh, I just cut the grass, you know. I'm not all that fancy stuff. It's nothing to do with me. So for us, that's really valuable. We're now in the place where we're going to be publishing our first set of social accounts. We would have been nowhere near that if we hadn't have been able to use all that information. The other thing we do is use data to get insight about our impact and need. So we're able to map things, find things out, make decisions based on our data. And it's about drawing these little maps, understand where people are coming from, how people access us and why. And in terms of impact, we can start monitoring with people what is the most impactful thing that we're doing. So is that giving people employment advice? Is it giving them financial inclusion advice? Impact gives us that tool where we can hold all that data and analyse it. It also tells us about where different people are and where we can predict that we need to move our services to in order to make sure that all our areas are covered. So I'm not techie, I will tell you that for a fact. And actually, when we were researching what tools we needed to use, I was quite harsh in terms of what do these tools do, how do they help us, because I don't believe in technology for the sake of it. I want technology to be an enabler, I don't want it to be a barrier. I want anyone to be able to input and use the system so that it doesn't become hard work and not used. And also, I think our journey with Impact was also about, it wasn't perfect, it wasn't off the shelf. That was actually something very attractive to us, because it meant that we could look at what our requirements were and help them develop that tool. We are a medium-sized housing provider. We're probably very typical of most of the sector. So what we are looking for is probably what quite a lot of other people are going to be looking for as well. So it helps us in terms of comparing ourselves to what other people are doing and where we think we should be focusing ourselves. And we don't see ourselves purely as consumers. We think as the people in our neighbourhoods, we've got something to offer as well in terms of what our customers, suppliers and stakeholders want us to do in terms of social value, and how important social value is actually to the whole communities that we work in, not just to us as a housing association. So that's me done. I'll hand back to Matt.
If anybody has any questions for any of the panellists, my colleague Kelly will be moving amongst you with some microphones, or another colleague moving amongst you with some microphones.
Thanks for that. So yeah, we're giving you two really exciting opportunities today. One exciting opportunity is to have guilt-free cake, which doesn't come around very often. And exciting opportunity two is to talk to these two lovely people here who are working on, I think, you can see some really kind of leading edge stuff in the space of social value, and have really been on a journey to really grapple with this question about what social value is, what the difference the housing sector should be making, and how that can be measured. So yeah, does anybody have any questions? Perhaps before I get into that, I could just have a quick show of hands. Who here is at an organisation that is doing something socially valuable, that is creating social value? Anyone? Okay. And how many of you have a social value strategy in place? Okay. One. How many of you are on top of kind of measuring what the outcomes that you create are? Okay, a couple of you. So yeah, bridging that gap is some of the work that Jamie and Issy have been doing here. So yeah, on that note, do you have any questions for them about this topic? Yes.
Hi. You both mentioned visibility, and I was just wondering, is that internal visibility, or do you share data with local partners, with any outside companies or organisations?
So we share all our data internally, but we have also started sharing it externally. So we've shared some of it externally at a point in time, and we are also about to publish our first set of social accounts, which is basically all of our evidence from what we've gathered in terms of the social value impact of what we do and what we do with our partners and stakeholders as well.
For us, the dashboard that we've set up is operational within our affordable housing business, and that's visible to everyone within that business, and that's where I think that we're starting to get a real movement and some traction with staff who, I think Issy alluded to this previously, people like gas fitters, engineers, starting to see the impact of what they do in social value terms. That's been really, really helpful. We will publish some of the data that we pull externally, and certainly as we roll the product out across those different market sectors in the business, increasingly it will be published externally. But as I think I alluded to earlier, for us, we're really keen in the business development opportunities that having this meaningful way of reporting social value information presents itself.
Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, thanks. It was good to see some of the visuals from the reporting, but it looked like it was reporting on inputs and outputs, not on outcomes or impact. How are you reporting and measuring that and then reporting that?
Yeah, so maybe if I pick up answering that from a tool perspective, and then I could pass over to you. But yeah, I mean the tool that we've been working to implement with Places for People in Remote Manchester, and actually kind of co-developing with those organisations effectively, really has a number of ways that it can try and either estimate or directly quantify an outcome. And this is maybe the most thorny issue in social value measurement, is really how you can say not just we cut some grass over here, but actually what was the end impact of that. And really there's kind of two key ways that we do that. One of which is applying a set of proxy values to that. So there's some pretty well researched evidence banks, data sets. HACT is one of them, but there's a number of others. TOMS is another framework that's kind of gaining a lot of traction. The values in the government's Green Book, etc., where we can actually automatically analyse the input. So somebody can tell us that they've cut some grass today, and we can dig out the appropriate proxy and apply it to that. Now that's only ever going to be an estimate, and however, in many cases, that is way better than what is being done right now, which is no understanding whatsoever. The other way that the tool seeks to do this is to actually just ask people. So we're able to reach out to people over email or via SMS, and this is something that works very well. I don't know if anybody here is running any kind of job club type activities or any kind of work that is direct with residents, but actually, often some of the easiest ways to ask on what the impact of an activity is not to do a lot of statistical science, as much as we love that. It is to actually just ask the residents involved and be quite rigorous in how frequently you ask them and what you ask them to actually understand that. So if you want to understand if your employability program has made people feel more confident about getting a job, then simply text messaging them that question, perhaps 3 months after they've been through a program, our system deals with that and then records the answer. Any other thoughts about kind of making this real in terms of outcomes?
Yeah. I mean, what I'd add to what Matt said is that we sort of took a conscious decision to move away from a monetised social value. Nothing wrong with that, but it came out to a really, really simple concept, really, which is when we spoke to our frontline staff and we said, what's meaningful to you? They said, just tell us what you've done. Getting someone into work is a really great outcome. And they were really interested in that. When we told them the monetised social value of that, there was a recognition that it was a good thing, but it became too abstract and too theoretical. I hesitate to use the word folksy. Matt will have heard this many times before, but we just wanted a really communicable way of demonstrating what we do. So it's got to be meaningful, not to social value experts. It's got to be meaningful to our customers and our staff. That's the important thing. So if we do monetize a value, it would be more in terms of we've saved customers X number of pounds on their heating bills by improving the efficiency of their dwelling. That's what's more important to us. One thing we haven't, and I spoke previously about the functionality that we haven't yet started to unpack with Impact. But, we can do automated surveys through the tool, which I think is a really, really powerful thing. And the tool will crunch the responses and crunch the numbers themselves. We haven't got there yet, but that's certainly going to be one of the ways that we can start to look at more qualitative outcomes in the future.
I think as well as inputs and outputs, I think it is also about knowing what your objective is that then captures. So this is why we have our social outcomes that the impact tool supports. So it's about knowing what you're measuring and why you're measuring it, rather than just collecting numbers, which I think was one of the things I looked at in a number of other tools, that I don't just want to count numbers, I want to know why that and what the difference is. It's the so what factor, I think, because actually you can spend an awful lot of money as a housing association and not actually make an impact, and it's about making sure that everything that you're doing, you're measuring and you're bringing back to the so what factor. How does that contribute in terms of social value and the wider social economy that you're trying to build? So for me, impact is part of that suite of measurements and work that you would undertake.
Thanks. And speaking of that social economy, the cakes that we had today were actually from a social enterprise that One Manchester supported with your community funding. Do you want to say a little bit about that programme or that support?
Yeah, so Back on Track is a local homeless social enterprise who have developed Swan Kitchens. We run a Catalyst Fund, which is a business fund and we give small grants to organisations to develop and also scale their ideas, with the hope that basically we create more diversity in the economy around our areas. We have a lot of deprived areas, and we want to make sure that people are given the tools, the techniques, the opportunities in order to compete with other people in that area.
Thanks. Any other questions for our panel today? Just one from me then. I think we talked a lot here about kind of valuation. We've talked a lot about tools and software. Could you give us some examples of what really is going on the ground as a result of all this kind of strategy and conceptual thinking and measurement? Is there any particular piece of social impact or story that you've discovered that you think is really would help make it real for people about what the difference it actually is your organisations are making on the ground with some of this stuff?
So I can think of two, but I'll start with one. So I'll go back to grounds maintenance. So for example, we have with our grounds maintenance, we take on apprenticeships, and they are from the local area. By putting in all of the stuff that they're doing into the impact tool, the person who leads that, who's very enterprising minded, very community focused, now has a massive understanding about how they're impacting on the community and not just on the area. One of the apprentices is somebody who lives in our local area. We had loads of problem with people messing with the communal spaces. They went out and went, actually I work there now, you better not do that. And actually that we've seen as a massive impact, and if we hadn't shown the impact that they have on social value, to be honest, I don't think that those connections would have been made. And I think a lot of our view about this is about people connecting to that bigger story. I'll pass you back, and if you want another one.
I think ours is fairly similar. I mean, the two examples really would be the real engagement with frontline staff. But rolling back a bit, one of the things that we really found very quickly was how much we actually did that we didn't know about and that we hadn't recorded previously. And that was in terms of us mapping the business and finding out how social value manifests itself in core delivery. But also in terms of those individual stories and staff members coming forward and having a place that they could put the achievements that they made that wouldn't have been recognised otherwise. But I think is the example about grounds maintenance. We've done a similar thing with grounds maintenance PMD around, we're starting to look at fleet efficiency, but we've done things around some of their core business, their asset-based interventions, and starting to pull data from automated systems. So, their contract managers don't need to do anything. We can just go back to them with what social value what social outcomes have been achieved. And what we're finding is that frontline asset-based staff, grounds maintenance, PMD guys, are actually starting to look on the dashboard and understand how their part of the business works in the social value context and what their role is within it. And that's creating a real sense of ownership, a sense of belonging within the business, and just an understanding of what the impact that they make. If I could make one very, very other quick example. Working with some of the ventures business has been an absolute eye-opener for me, because we're not just a housing provider. And we've just got a recently launched asset management company. And, to be blunt, they're bothered about profit. That's what they're there to do. But thankfully our chief executive said, well, actually, yeah, you're going to have to do that, but we do want to see social value manifest itself in every part of the business. And those guys just, frankly, clueless. Why wouldn't they be? It's not their core business. It's not their key competence or skills. And what rolling the product out has done is to broker conversations where we can influence what they're going to do. They're not going to send some of their managers to Malawi to build school. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong at all. But my view would be, why would we do that if we can make an impact in that local community where they're managing the assets and then create not a movement, but a social infrastructure around what they're doing that is going to help them to win more business with that local authority or with customers in that area.
So really creating a kind of virtuous circle there of having impact and succeeding, and therefore being able to fund more of that impact. Do you have any further questions? Great, so I think we'll wrap up there, but just before we do, it'd be great just to hear from you briefly both about what you think the kind of biggest challenge or opportunity there is in social value for the housing sector. What are the real key things that you think some of the organisations here should be paying attention to? And just give you a second to think on that one.
I think for me, it's the sector is changing. It's diversifying, it's doing different things. It's a lot of us are moving into more placemaking and regen roles, and what we'd struggle to do that with some of the existing methodologies, I think, to actually capture the breadth and diversity of what we do across all those different functions. So to me, that's the really interesting journey, a common language that we can report across different disciplines and across the different elements of our sector.
I think it also gives a voice to the activity that you are doing day to day, but that we all struggle to qualify or quantify or talk about in a meaningful way, and joining all those things up in a way that actually your stakeholders, your local authorities, your key partners and your customers can actually all understand, because you've got the information, you've got the data, you can use that however you want. And actually for us, that has been the most powerful part of our journey, and actually the thing that I think has most relevance for the sector, I would say.
Excellent. Thank you both for that. Just to let you know, because of course there is no such thing as free cake. So, and by eating the cake, you've actually signed an agreement. No, you haven't. We've been hearing a bit today about the work of Impact, which is the software social enterprise that I'm one of the founders of, and working with these organisations to use technology to help them understand social value. And if that's resonated with any of you, you want to pick our brains further about that, or you want to hear about that tool, feel free to come and talk to me, or you can talk to my colleagues Beth Ann Williams and Chris Farrell, who are at the back there, about that. But other than that, please could you join me in thanking our panel. And yeah, we hope you have a great day and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much. Matthew.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you.